Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast with Blaha. And today I'm having fat-free Greek yogurt, almond butter, and milled flax seeds. All right, talk about anti-inflammatory diets, and it's not just my opinion. I've talked to quite a few dietitians I know. In fact, I had a short chat with Nick Snow the other day about it, who's working on his RD right now as a trainer. And we were talking about anti-inflammatory diets. And one of the things that I do these days, and I find that helps me tremendously, is that if I look at the way my diet impacts inflammation. And the reason that matters is something I notice more and more when I've done different things as I get older, uh, is that my tendons and my joints become the limiting factor of what I can do in my training. Right? Remember what I always say, it's not about what we do, it's what we recover from. And I find the two things that get me in trouble the quickest is when I run into overuse problems, right? Which is where we've seen some of that in the past. And my diet's too inflammatory. So even like when I hit the 605 cambered bar squat, I was doing the vertical diet, which is great for gains. Like if someone says, hey, what's a great way to put on a ton of muscle and strength? Vertical diet, hands down. Problem, it's high in white rice and saturated fat. It's high in these things. And it does somewhat can limit vegetables, fruits, in the sense of you're just trying to hit the RDA. Well, the problem we have with just hitting the RDA on your vegetables for, say, your basic vitamins and minerals, is that it doesn't give us a really high antioxidant load. And here's what we find when we start looking at inflammatory markers. Because my hips and stuff were hurting during that time. Okay, they were hurting quite a bit as I was ramping up to that. And I don't have these problems so much now. I used to get a lot more inflammation with things like my sumo pulling. I've had my shoulder inflammation issues. All these things always start in phases where my diet might be geared towards purely gaining muscle and performance without thoughts for the recovery end. And so when we start talking about inflammation, there's tons and tons and tons of research on this. In fact, it's been noted that Tom Brady follows an anti-inflammatory diet. Right? This is one reason he's still successful in the NFL in his 40s. How many extra millions of dollars has this guy made by controlling his inflammation? Right? And you generally feel better when you do. That's the main thing. People can say, well, I want to live my life. I don't care about performance. Really? Feeling better. Physically feeling better and not hurting is part of living your life and being happy. What's the data tell us? Really high on the list, antioxidant status. What do we mean by all that? Well, obviously vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin E, all those things, right? Those are important. Or those above the RDA in your diet, and I don't mean by adding a supplement. How about tons of polyphenols, phytonutrients, all these things we get from fruits, vegetables, nuts. The higher these go generally is correlated with lower inflammation in the body. And it's not just because you're hitting your vitamins and minerals. It's the sum total antioxidant status, right? Real high on the list. Which foods cause the most inflammation? It's surprising. People actually get it wrong. They always think it's omega-6 fats. No, only arachidonic acid. What really causes inflammation? Top of the list, usually refined sugars, right? Other refined carbohydrates behind that, saturated fat. Now, the saturated fat one, when you say that, you get tons of people, they make stupid knee-jerk responses. You're saying saturated fat is bad. No, not automatically. There's a threshold where it becomes bad. Okay? If I tell you that water will kill you at a certain intake, it's not saying water is bad. Too much oxygen will kill you. Oxygen's not bad. Okay, so when we say this is what I'm saying is heavy amounts of saturated fat. The problem is the average American eats in excess amount of saturated fat. attributes to our inflammation. What do I think is excess? Over about 20 grams a day. We don't have enough data on that to pin that down. Still an area being researched, but we know when we replace saturated fat in our diet with polyunsaturated fats or lower GI carbs, what happens? Inflammation markers go down. Insulin sensitivity improves, general health improves. But again, it's only lowering. It doesn't have to go to zero, right? In other words, eating 1 gram of saturated fat a day versus 10 or 11 doesn't seem to have any significant negatives on you. It's when we start getting higher and higher it becomes a problem. But it increases inflammation in the body, right? Refined sugars. This is a big one. And so, yeah, I mean, if someone were to say, are you saying that if I care about inflammation, especially as we get older and we're trying to maximize health and performance, I shouldn't have flexible dieting, and if it fits your macros? Yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying eating a bunch of refined sugar. I'm not talking about once every couple of weeks on a cheat day. I'm talking about, hey, I'm going to work in my Pop-Tarts or Ben & Jerry's every day. That's where it's a problem, when you're doing it every day. It's the chronic intake. And I'm not talking about the metabolic effects here. It's not what we're saying. That requires a higher intake. To suffer metabolic effects and things like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, your intakes of these things have to be pretty high. Not moderation. They have to be really high. However, come back over, the average American doesn't moderate these things. But inflammation, yeah, you probably need to cut it out. It's not something you should be having every day. You need to have the refined sugar to nearly zero. I have no problem eating zero. It's easy. I just don't buy foods that have it in it. Everything's single ingredient anyways. So what about foods that promote lower inflammation? Polyunsaturated fats. And this is overwhelming evidence of this. And it's omega-3s do it best. Omega-6 is second best. By the way, omega-6 tends to be better for improving insulin sensitivity. The old data that people had that, omega-6 causes inflammation, that's very outdated. And when I say data, I don't mean it was supported. It was a hypothesis. It was a hypothesis that people ran with in the fitness world and a few doctors that wasn't supported. It wasn't what the science was saying. Well, I'm not going to get into the full nuance of that as far as it was really the concerns of LA converting into arachidonic acid. Turns out it isn't as big of a deal or as common as we had once thought it would be. That's why there was concerns of inflammation, because arachidonic acid does increase inflammation, probably just as much as saturated fat, right? It's up there. But omega-6 actually, in general, even refined omega-6s, not saying that's an ideal food source. I want to make that clear. I'm not telling you to drink a bunch of refined canola oil, in other words. But even refined omega-6s tend to lower inflammation. Okay? They're just not necessarily the best foods for you to be eating for a host of reasons. They tend to be very nutritionally void. All right, we're getting towards, junk food. All right? Not the best nutrition content, but the omega-6 there still has a lot of its benefits. Hey, but omega-6 fats. So again, what do you guys see me do every day? I do fish oil, I do flaxseed, I do almond butter. My diet's very high in polyunsaturated fats. Low in saturated fat, zero in refined carbohydrates. Lots of vegetables, or fruit when I'm doing fruit. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.